9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello and welcome to this month's NOTAM podcast. I'm Tim Robinson, Editor-in-Chief of Aerospace, and this month I'm joined by Features Editor Dominic Ward.
Hi, how's it going?
Deputy Editor Steve Bridgewater is sadly missing this month, so we're down to a crew of two on Aerospace NOTAM. It's another edition of our podcast looking at global aviation, aerospace and space news, and what we have upcoming in the next issue of Aerospace. Well, the current issue of Aerospace, March 2026. In this edition, well, it's been a busy month, hasn't it? We'll be talking about the ongoing situation in the Middle East, insights into both the defence and commercial aviation implications of the situation. First off, we can just have a quick canter of around where have we been this month.
Do you want to take the lead as editor-in-chief, editor's privilege?
Well, I've been up to the opposite direction from the Middle East. Really, I've been in the far north with Iceland, with the Swedish Air Force, looking at NATO air policing in Iceland. So that was an exciting trip up there. It's the first time that the Swedish Air Force, they joined NATO in 2024. It's the first time they've been in command of an air policing detachment. They've got 6 Gripen Cs up there at Reykjavik, and about 100 personnel and a counter drone unit as well, topically. And they're there helping protect, defend, deter Iceland from intrusions. So really interesting visit, flying visit up there to Icelandic air policing, and just how kind of cold it is there, cold and windy there in Iceland. How about you?
I mean, unlike you, I've been in the relative warmth then, so I haven't had to dig out the thermals. I've been at the Society's headquarters then this week for the Commercial Aviation Summit, which was a really, really great couple of days. Some fantastic speakers, some really frank and honest discussions around all things commercial aviation and the state of the industry, and where things are and where things are going, more importantly. We're at a really kind of exciting crossroads where AI and tech is starting to kind of really kind of take off, pardon the pun, and also kind of bridging skills gaps and trying to kind of encourage the next generation to come through. So we had some really nice panels, some really insightful comments made, and I think the thing that really kind of stuck in my mind was just how friendly, I think, is the best way to describe it. We're all in the same boat, right? We're all working for different organisations. We've all got different ideas. But ultimately, when we all get together like this, you suddenly realise just how well connected and friendly the industry is, because we're all striving to do the same thing and to ensure that aviation and commercial aviation has a really positive future going forward. So it was a really, really wholesome couple of days at Society headquarters. Really, really enjoyable.
Yeah, when you've got things like sort of safety and geopolitics and security, it affects everybody in civil aerospace, and everyone's on the same page there. Yeah. Okay. So the other thing I went to, I had a briefing from Lockheed Martin, and that was pretty interesting. On Lockheed Martin UK, looking less on sort of F-35 and more on them positioning themselves to be a sort of second space prime for the UK. So obviously the home champion here is Airbus Defence and Space. They leverage their kind of European connections as part of Airbus. They do a lot of work already. Lockheed Martin's pitch there is, wouldn't it be good to have a second space prime in there, which could link in to the US? So Lockheed, the world's biggest, one of the world's biggest space companies, if not the world's biggest space company. You think about sort of kind of Mars probes, Orion. etc., etc. And they're now talking about expanding into the UK and boosting their space capabilities, boosting their space presence. Talking about a factory in the northeast for satellites and a sort of like almost like an incubation hub, a tech zone there. A centre there for excellence for satellites to build up, that capability in the UK. Their goal there is really to get onto there and really be Skynet, which is obviously the government's sort of the UK MOD's secure satcoms capability that's up for grabs at the moment. Obviously, the previous incumbent there was Airbus, so there's a bit of a kind of a European versus American, or European versus UK. You might sort of say as to choice there in the MOD as to who do we go with? Do you go with the the existing kind of supplier, or do you open it up and get a like a second space prime in the UK? That could reach out to America. Now, obviously, it comes there with a lot of geopolitical baggage at the moment, and whether people are, whether politicians, I suppose, are willing to, kind of put more dependence there into the hands of the US in another sort of like capability for the UK. But interesting stuff. One to watch. What else? Where else have you been, Dom?
Yeah, so I guess kind of one of the things that I have done privately is I've tried to introduce my partner Emma into the world of aviation. So she is long suffering, so I took her up to Manchester Airport to have a mooch around the visitors park, the viewing park, and to have a look at Concorde, which, she's by her own admission, she's not an aviation enthusiast, but my word, did she enjoy being stood at the fence watching aeroplanes departing and landing and picking up some of the stuff around Concorde as well. So we might have another convert into the fold. Hopefully, I'm reliably informed that she categorically did not enjoy it, apart from the massive smile on her face and the fact that she does it to wind me up a little bit. But after that, I've been over to Affinity then at RAF Cranwell.
Okay.
So Affinity celebrating 10 years this year. Really kind of interesting chat there with the team over at Affinity, and a great look around their hangars as well. So I managed to go there on a day where it was absolutely cataclysmic rain, as we seem to have had in the UK every single day since the turn of the new year. So as you can imagine, right, pinging off the roof of a World War II hangar, it was great fun to be in and around, and so they had in the hangars then the Grob prefects working on some of those. But I think the thing that kind of interested me was the Embraer Phenom. So they've just returned.
Just for our listeners, what do Affinity do?
Oh, yeah, so Affinity then. So these guys then are a bit of another kind of centre of excellence, I suppose, then. So looking at bringing people into defence, into the industry, working on maintaining the aeroplanes, upskilling people, but also kind of working closely hand in hand then with the RAF to hand off the aeroplanes for people going through their flight training, and those really kind of early introductions then to flight. So as I mentioned there, the Grob prefects, so they are your ab initio trainers, really kind of a great bit of kit, very comfortable. I was managed to get myself sat in one of those, and certainly when you're doing a couple of hours sortie, then really kind of a great bit of fun to be in, with a bit of poke under the hood, as it were. So yes, one of the things that they mentioned whilst I was there was the outfit at RAF Valley with the Texans, and we'll talk about upskilling people. One of the biggest employers on the island over Valley Way is a chicken processing plant factory. And they've taken a whole bunch of people after that kind of closed down, a whole bunch of people into Valley to get them working on aeroplanes and really kind of introducing them to the industry, just showing that it's not a closed book, it's not a closed shop. There's no real barrier to entry, because Affinity are doing their damnedest to remove that barrier to entry. So a really kind of nice 10-year celebration going on with the team there. They had an Embraer Phenom that they'd just returned back into service, and a couple of days afterwards had a bit of a bird strike. So the team were working on one of the engines and using boroscopes to check for any damage and really kind of just make sure that the aircraft is still reasonably tip-top, and whether they need to kind of swap any engines in and out. But there's a great feel about the place, especially, you know, all the great work they've done over the last decade and looking ahead to where they're going next. So, another kind of fun one to be around there.
Fantastic. Okay, right. Well, on that, we've kind of rounded up where we've been. On to the main news here, which anyone following the news, well, unless you're living under a rock or you're in a different part of the solar system, won't have escaped your notice that the conflict in Iran and the Middle East is kind of widened, expanded in scope. We've had Operation Epic Fury named by the US, and that's a US-Israeli military operation, ostensibly to sort of, it started off with the goal of denying Iran's sort of like ambitions to develop a nuclear weapon, or to bring a nuclear weapon basically to some sort of operational status, which kind of suggests that the last year's Operation Midnight Hammer wasn't a full success as was claimed at the time. What that's happened is it's sparked off a widespread retaliation by Iran in terms of drone ballistic missile strikes all across the Middle East, to their Gulf neighbours, to US and bases. We've had THAAD radar sites reportedly hit, naval base in Bahrain, airfields attacked, airports, we'll get to that in a second, and causing absolute chaos. Now, one of the factors there, I think, is that they have, one of the strikes has sort of taken out the main leadership, and I wonder whether what we've seen from the retaliation in these widespread targets, in these sort of like seemingly random attacks, is perhaps local commanders being given permission to fire on kind of pre-planned sort of targets, as in, if you don't hear anything from Central Command, these are the list of targets we want you to hit. So what's going on at the moment is, as we record this podcast, is there's a hunt there for air defence targets, aircraft on the ground, but also launchers. Launchers there for ballistic missiles, transporter erector launchers, TELs. Some of these are quite big things. They're difficult. Well, they can be hidden quite well. I mean, one has to look at the 1991 Scud hunt in the first Gulf War, but they're quite easier. Well, they're easier to find than the new breed of things like Shahed launchers, where these small drones can be assembled, rapidly dispersed, and they can be, kind of put into almost a small van or something, and sort of spread out, or an Arctic truck. So that's what's happening in this moment. What we seem to be happening is that the Gulf nations, UAE in particular, has done an amazing job in intercepting many of these missiles, intercepting many of these drones. They've had these air defence ready, and I think to be when you've travelled to the Middle East and you've been to places like the Dubai Air Show, and you get the sense that they've been expecting this for sort of some time. That the threat across the kind of Persian Gulf, it's been there, and they've been ready for it. But it's kind of a race of time, really, because these interceptor missiles, Patriots, THAADs, whatever you're shooting down these drones or incoming missiles, you're depleting stocks very, very quickly. And this is one of the concerns there. In the US, they're also talking about that, and there's even been reporting there of the US Pentagon pulling in some of the the arms manufacturers, the missiles manufacturers, and saying you guys need to be churning these weapons and missiles out faster. We are running out of precision weapons. We may be running out of missiles. So there is that. It's a race against time, but it does seem the launch rates do seem to have sort of slowed down a little bit. So that seems to be an indication that the US and Israel has been successful in kind of hunting down, at least targeting, not only the launchers but also the factories where they come from and some of the facilities. We've also had for our kind of UK listeners might be well aware, Cyprus was attacked by some kind of drone. It wasn't from Iran as first thought. It was probably launched from a Iranian proxy group in Lebanon, and that turned up. And there's now, after some governments saying, well, it didn't really, it was launched indiscriminately and it wasn't really aimed in our direction, it had hit the U2 hangar there. So USCF U2s are based there, are deployed there, and the UK there, despite the reluctance to become involved, initial reluctance, is now being kind of slowly dragged into this conflict, even on a sort of defensive basis, because we've had our assets attacked, and also because of the huge amount of UK expats that live and work in the Gulf. So what else has happened? Well, there's also we could be here on this podcast, I think, for a good few hours, couldn't we, Dom? Just summarising, but some of the highlights, but notable incidents. The first first air-to-air kill of a crewed aircraft. That was an Israeli F-35 that downed a Yak-130, Iranian Yak-130 trainer over Tehran. US has sunk an Iranian drone aircraft carrier. That was unveiled with great fanfare kind of last year by kind of Iranian propaganda, flying drones off it. It didn't last very long. And then we've also had this utterly bizarre incident where 3 USCF F-15E Strike Eagles were shot down in broad daylight and within visual range by a Q-80 F-18. So the after-action report and the debriefing on that are going to be fascinating. Luckily, all 6 crew ejected, survived, but it's something there that illustrates the kind of fog of war that is going on, because there are these intense attacks going on, and how how difficult it might be to kind of separate friend from foe, even with you've got things like IFF, data links, etc., in the heat of the moment. So we'll wait to see the combat report from that one about what actually happened. The other interesting thing from that is should this an open question is how long is this going to go on. But another key thing there is Ukraine has offered to help in the counter-drone fight, and I think one of the things there is should Iran now has got its own problems to deal with, and I think that will somehow a little bit take the pressure off of Ukraine in dealing with Shahads, dealing with drones. Obviously, they're built locally now by Russia, but the Iranians were sending their drones to Russia to use against Ukraine. So I think it will sort of take the pressure off them in that respect. The other thing also,
as we record, we record the day after then. So Volodymyr Zelensky, I've just pulled up his tweet on that point. He said, We received a request from the United States for specific support in protection against Shahids in the Middle East region. I gave instructions to provide the necessary means and ensure the presence of Ukrainian specialists who can guarantee the required security. Ukraine helps partners who help ensure our security and protect the lives of our people. Glory to Ukraine. So it's a really interesting piece then that you mentioned about the link there between the Ukraine-Russia conflict and Zelensky offering to help protect allies.
Yeah, I mean the other interesting thing, a couple of other final points is obviously Cyprus being attacked. The UK is now bolstering its defences there. We had F-35s that were forward based there before the conflict, before the attack started, before it fully erupted. So there was an appreciation there that the UK needed to increase its defence posture. But then we are sending HMS Dragon, which is Type 45 destroyer, to kind of provide more air defence. So that's going to take 2 weeks. It's going to be re-rolled. There's extra extra Typhoons now being sent there to kind of help sort of defend Cyprus.
There's Wildcat helicopters going down as well, isn't
there? Wildcat helicopters. So again, it's from initial UK reluctance to get involved. There is this sort of we're having to deploy assets that are being stretched to the very limit. The other interesting thing there, I think, is some of the footage that has come out of this in many ways. But one of them, there was one aspect is people taking kind of videos, Instagram videos, TikTok videos, etc. of Shahids and missiles impacting and fires there in kind of Dubai, the UEA, and these sort of like big sort of tourist spots where normally it's sort of influencer videos by swimming pools and things like that. And one of the interesting, this is not a new problem. In fact, if you think about it, going back in history, in 1940, at the height of the Battle of Britain, the UK government had to put out an information film, and it was called Goofers Corner, and it was basically telling people to get inside an air raid shelter and get indoors instead of watching air battles over Britain with the RAF and the Luftwaffe duking it out, because you've got cannon shells, you've got bombs dropping, you've got bits of aeroplanes, you've got kind of bullets whizzing over there. And people were going out and watching the action. Obviously, they didn't have smartphones in those days to record it, but it's an interesting parallel with 1940. The urge to, go out there, even in a sort of time of destruction and kind of chaos. The urge there to go out and watch what's happening. It's still there. But I mean, the commercial side of things is also it's just disrupted civil aviation, hasn't it? I mean, it's basically broken the link between Europe and Asia Pacific in air travel.
Absolutely.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so as a result of the military action, and as we all know, the Middle Eastern hub is such a vital link from hemisphere to hemisphere. People travelling through Dubai, Abu Dhabi to onwards places, Singapore, Australia, and where we find ourselves is obviously airspace closures. And we've also had lots of statements from airlines who have halted operations, all understandably so. As we record, the first of the repatriation flights back to the UK have arrived. I think the UK government said last night, as we record today, that some 4,500 people had been repatriated. And again, it's an interesting point that you make, Tim, about the social media nature of things. I mean, I've seen people that I know in Dubai, people that work in motorsport. I think one of the guys from the British Touring Car Championship was at the Palm Jumeirah himself when obviously that was hit by Iranian fire. So we're in a really kind of interesting place where the first that people know about anything are those that are connected on social media. Abu Dhabi airport, Dubai airport, both of them have been hit by missile attacks. In those cases, sadly, one person has been reported as being killed. Others have been injured. And yeah, repatriation flights to the UK at least have started departing from Oman, but that's not been without a little bit of controversy. The original departure was scrubbed due to a technical issue, and some that were trying to get on board these flights have described the operation as a shambles and an absolute chaos. To use some of the more powerful headlines that have been floating around, and it's a really tricky thing to be doing. I mean, if your aircraft goes tech in the middle of a war zone, how do you repair and recover? But also, there's a lot of people trying to get back to the UK, and certainly from a passenger side of things, a little bit of patience probably wouldn't go amiss. But then also, on the other hand, the communication channels need to be clearer. So it's a very fluid situation. As we record, flights have started to reoperate from. To reopen from Dubai. We've also seen issues in Qatar as well, but certainly as I sit here looking at the flight radar map, flights are operating in and around the Dubai and Sharjah airports. Qatar seems to be still very much off limits at the moment. It's a fluid and dynamic landscape in commercial aviation. It's always, one slight issue. It's a butterfly effect. One small issue, and all of a sudden we have a bigger crisis on our hands. So I think it will be really interesting to see how the continued military offensive plays out, of course, but the impact that's going to have on what really is a massive hub, global hub for cargo, for passenger movements, north, south, east, west. It's a really kind of big linchpin to be squeezing.
So some of the things I've seen was the authorities, particularly in the UAE, again, are being kind of ahead of the game there and have moved swiftly in terms of announcing things like the government will pay for people to be stuck in hotels, sort of like that they'll meet all costs, and also just stuff like for delayed passengers going out there and stuck in airports, going around with bottles of water and things like that for people sort of stuck there, and again, it's one of the things there's very probably a well-rehearsed plan that has sort of swung into action there in terms of what happens if things do kick off in across the water. But I think that's a kind of a positive view. What you were at this commercial aviation summit there earlier this week, where you had the airports and the airlines there. What was the view there?
Yeah, so I think after the weekend action, quite a few scripts and notes had to be hastily torn up and rewritten. I think the view of the industry is very much from certainly the conversations that we had in the week is still a little bit wait and see, watch and wait, because ultimately it is a fast moving picture. But there are, as you've just said, Tim, these are also things that people have been planning for. And we always talk about redundancy in aviation, whether that's in the aircraft on the flight deck or on ground ops. So I think there's also a view that says this was always coming, this was always inevitable, but we swing into action to say, hang on a minute, this is how we're going to mitigate the impact that we're going to experience. So there's still a little bit of wait and see, because who knows what's going to happen next. But there seems to be a feeling then that people are braced and ready. And as you say, there are some positive. It all sounds sort of wrong to say positive things coming out of a war zone, but the governments are prepared and helping travellers, because ultimately it's in their best interests to firstly keep the positive PR around their own nations and the tourist economy coming into the country, but also it's ultimately a very scary situation for people that are just going and having a holiday. It could be a bucket list item to go to Dubai, for instance, and all of a sudden they now find themselves in this mess. So hopefully over the weekend and into next week we'll get a bit more clarity over some of what's going to happen next, and some further repatriation flights will get out of the area. I wouldn't want to be on the ground. I think I do feel for those that are stranded out there at the moment.
Yeah, well, we'll obviously be tracking this situation or monitoring and keeping people updated on what's happening, particularly with kind of on the military and on the civil side of things. What is the end game? We still don't know there yet, and how long might this last? And it's second order or third order effects that kind of ripple through. Before we go on to what's in the magazine, there's two more things. I mean, that we'll probably want to mention. Artemis, which was supposed to launch around about now, wasn't it?
Today, I think it was supposed to go today as we record on the 6th.
That has been delayed. It's being pushed back to the pad. So that has now been slipped to April. Unfortunately, but the US, NASA does seem now to have a plan, and they've changed the plan there for an inner orbit demo, and then put in an extra mission there to improve the cadence, to improve the frequency. So you've got you're kind of trying to build up more experience and do things quicker. Turn around missions quicker, rather than have these big gaps where you lose the experience, and then you're kind of troubleshooting problems that maybe happened a couple of years ago, and it's maybe the same sort of problem, but you've kind of lost that experience, and the other one, at least for the UK, is new medium helicopter has been announced.
Yes.
And Leonardo has been selected. We're for the AW149 as their sort of the UK utility helicopter to replace Puma. So that went up to the wire at the weekend previously. Just as everything else, sort of like conflict sort of started in the Gulf, but at least we've got some sort of progress with that. So, what's turning to matters aerospace? What have we got coming with this magazine? Well, in this month's magazine, the March one, we got everything from the fascinating article on Europe's drone wars. We've got the DEI pushback. Obviously, DI is a bit of a charged term, but we've got a fantastic article that looks at all aspects. Is it just pandering to the woke, or is it there are good reasons for it? And some of it is really interesting because some of it goes back decades. There's an interesting thing there about kind of British Airways putting Japanese stewardesses or stewards on their Japan services in the 1950s, because you're trying to be more inclusive and you're trying to appeal to your passengers. We've also got an interesting thing there on dynamic aerospace, going through to the how taking winds aloft could make could save fuel. The COVID's ongoing impact on aviation staff. That's a really fascinating bit from our human factors groups. And the recent International Fighter Conference there, what's happening on fighter programs around the year. Dom, is there anything in this month you're particularly excited by?
What? You mean other than my first feature going into the mag?
Well, tell us more about that. What's that?
Yeah, so my first feature then, in situ as features editor for Aerospace, is all about Takeva and their AR3 Evo. So at the back end of 2025, I went down to West Wales Airport in Aberporth. Typically wintry weather, blustery, raining, and damned cold. I tell you that much. Though not as cold, I'm sure, as your trip to Iceland this week. But yeah, so I went down there for a demo flight of the AR3 Evo. So making refinements, learnt out of things from the Ukraine conflict to uprate and upgrade the existing AR3 platform, and it was great. So we did get to see a demo. We had a gap in the weather. The wind abated, the rain kind of eased off. Ground crew swung into action to get this drone up in the air. So it has the ability to launch as either a rail or a VTOL. On this occasion, we had the VTOL aspect of it. So the team prepared it for flight, got it up into a kind of a low hover, did a systems check, and then away it went. One of the great things about West Wales Airport, I'm sure on a summer's day, are the views, but also offers for great flying and test flying of UAVs out over the waters, out over the coastline in kind of quieter managed airspace. So so this thing went up, did a couple of orbits out the back of the airfield, and came back down. Takeva are a really interesting organisation. Then, so they have the AR5, I believe it is, that's currently doing work with the Home Office in the Channel. But also they were very keen to kind of talk about their unicorn status, which is given to private companies that are listed as being valued over $1 billion. So a really interesting thing to have achieved in around a kind of a 20-year window. So really good stuff going down there. I've got as I say, 3 pages in the magazine for our members to read through, for those with a copy of the magazine. And I think it also went live as a blog on the website, didn't it?
Yeah, certainly. So I mean, so the AR3 has been combat proven in Ukraine, hasn't it? I mean, it's been and there. I mean, it's quite a small drone. It's like a kind of a tactical side, but it's got big capabilities, and it was even I think believed to be dueling S-400 SAM sites in Russian S-400 SAM sites in kind of over in Ukraine. So it gives you an idea of how capable it is. Right, so with that, we've obviously got the rest of the magazine with events, diary, President's message, CEO's message, new members spotlight. So do send us your news from around the branches, news, videos, clips, pictures, etc. And we'll see what we can do with featuring them. On to our upcoming RAS events. So we're recording this at the start of March. Next week at the Society HQ, we've got the RAS IATA Contrail Management Conference. That's looking to be very interesting. Contrail management, it's been something that's been discussed for a while. The science is coming together, and it could allow aviation to sort of slash its environmental, its impact on the climate, its non-CO2 kind of effect, if you will. So it'd be great to get an update on that. We've got the Mary Jackson virtual lecture also on 9th of March. And then next week we've got the RAS Weapon Systems and Capability Conference, 11th of March. I've just put a blog up on the blog today about Androl UK. They've got one of the speakers there, but I mean this one there is a need for a revolution, and looking at Ukraine, looking at events in the Middle East at the moment, and the need for scaling up production, getting stuff into there, getting missiles, getting munitions, getting drones into the hands of the warfighters quickly. I think that is going to be an absolute sort of like key and very interesting topical conference, because at the moment we're still stuck, and the point was, I put it in the article, is we're still stuck in an era from post-Cold War where we've been handcrafting exquisite systems that are great, but at a very slow rate. So we've been building sort of like, Tiger tanks and a handful of Tiger tanks, and all of a sudden you need to be churning out Sherman tanks by the hundreds, by the thousands. We've also got the next week. We've got the RAS History of Strategic Air Command. That's a HQ lecture on 12th of March. That's by Robert Hopkins, who's the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Aeronautical History. He is a former RC-135 pilot, so very, very interesting talk from him. We've got the RAS Annual Banquet. That's coming on the 14th of May. And then set your diaries for the RAS Future Air and Space Defence Summit, 20th to 21st of May. Again, I think that is going to be a landmark event. We've got, obviously, current events we're talking about on the pod today. We've got that to digest, but also what's going on with future fighters, drones, AI, missile defence, and especially what's going on there in Europe with the Franco-German FCAS program, which seems to be heading for a messy divorce. It seems to be dead at this point in the water, and what happens from that. Right, so moving on for the final bit of the pod. What have you been reading, watching, playing this month?
Well, I've been reading Andy Willman's book on Top Gear and Grand Tour Adventures, which, although is a fabulous read, not necessarily aviation related. So I'll take a back seat and let you drive on this one, Tim.
Okay, well, I haven't had much time to read, do any flight simming or watch much of that. But I've got a new book there to digest. Jumbo. From Scott Bateman. He is a former RAF C-130 pilot and also a former jumbo jet pilot. So this is all about the history of and impact of the 747. And if it's any bit as good as his book on the Hercules, it's going to be a cracking read. So I'm looking forward to reading Jumbo there once I get 2 minutes to breathe. Right, on that note, we'll bring this one to an end. Where can we reach us? I'm still plugging away on X at RAS Tim R. I'm on Blue Sky as well. Active on LinkedIn these days. Dom?
Yeah, so I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on X as RAS Dom W. You can find me on Facebook for those that want to hunt me down on that one. But yeah, my X account is now live and growing. I think last month I was having technical snags, as is the way with X, but I am up and running. So RAS Dom W.
Brilliant. And next month, obviously, we'll have Steve back with us. And as ever, keep sending us your comments, branch news, likes, subscribe, views, questions, feedback. We'd love to see what people have to say. We are on YouTube, we're on Spotify, SoundCloud, etc., etc. Do get in touch. Do tell us what you like, you don't like, etc. And we'll see you next month.
See you later.
See you then.